right, so that was more of the prosecution's opening statements. Again, Jeremiah Monell on trial for the murder of his estranged wife. Still with me, Jessica Jackson Sloan. Jessica, I want to dive right into this. Now, this appears to be, to me anyway, a pretty open and shut case. Now, I know you're a former defense attorney. How do you defend against the 12-year-old son who is of age, who can actually testify to what he saw? He can articulate what he saw. He saw his dad strangle his mother. He actually heard her hit the ground. How do you mount a defense against that in this case?
Now, this is a very hard case and a very emotional case. You hear the prosecutor kind of laying out some of the facts. You know, there had been an alleged decade of abuse that had happened. The woman had been, the victim had been stabbed over 48 times. You know, they've got the son who's saying he woke up in the middle of the night and saw daddy slamming mommy on the ground and stabbing her. He runs to the neighbor's house. He's telling the neighbor, you know, I found my mom dead. I mean, it's a very emotionally difficult case. And the prosecutor's laying out all these facts, and the jurors must be sitting there wondering, what on earth is the defense going to be? But I think in this case, you know, even though they do have eyewitness testimony, there's allegedly been a decade of abuse going on here, right? So at any point in the last decade, it could be that he saw, you know, his mom and his dad fighting. He maybe had seen, you know, his mom and his dad, or his dad slam his mom at some point then. Eyewitness testimony is not necessarily reliable. We know that trauma really impacts people's memories. It does. If you've ever had something bad happen to you and you sit down and you try and write out the details, you realize how hard it is to remember exactly what happened, because in that moment you're scared, you're frightened, you've got so much going on, adrenaline pumping, you're not paying attention to everything. And afterwards, it can be really hard to remember what actually happened, especially accurately. And we know that our brain tries to fill those memories in. So I would anticipate that they're going to have an expert to talk about memory, expert to talk about the trauma impact on memory, and how reliable this eyewitness testimony is.
Right. Now, I definitely understand eyewitness testimony. Being former law enforcement, you can't debate that. It can be flawed. But how do you explain knives that were inside the home that were then ditched behind the stove, and then Jeremy goes on the run for several weeks before he is actually captured? That is not the actions, if you will, of an innocent man. What say you?
Well, the knives being ditched behind the stove doesn't mean the husband did it necessarily, right? It means that whoever killed her threw the knives behind the stove. So I don't want to point to that as a fact that, you know, confirms him being guilty. Going on the run, now that obviously is going to be used against him, and it makes him look more guilty. But maybe he got wind that he was a suspect and he got scared. He's in the middle of a divorce. Wife winds up dead. His son is saying it was him who did it. Perhaps that's what led him to go on the run. So we're going to have to see how the defense attorney weaves all this together, you know, whether or not he decides to pull in anybody that can talk about, you know, the fact that the husband maybe was afraid that he would be named as a suspect, and that doesn't automatically show that he's guilty.
Well, I will say that is a fair assessment. I mean, typically, anytime there's a murder like this, of course, the spouse is the first person the police look at, especially when there's a divorce pending and they've been estranged for quite some time. So, yeah, you definitely make a fair point there. On that note, before we hear from the defense, let's hear more of the prosecution's opening statements. All right, so that's some of the prosecution's opening statements. Now, you heard him say that Charles Merritt, only one man committed these crimes. Now, Joseph's father went on record saying he believes that more people were involved, and the defense says that the investigators botched this case from the beginning. But before we dive into that, let's hear more of the prosecution's opening statements.
Wanted a water fountain inside of their business. Joseph would provide it. He started the business initially with a guy named Dan Kavanaugh. Dan Kavanaugh was a web guy, created the web page. And the business essentially was a customer would order a fountain, it was already made, and they would basically retail it to the customer. In about 2006 or 2007, Joseph met the defendant, who fancied himself an entrepreneur, a welder, a designer. And Joseph began building custom fountains. In other words, if a business or a residence or someone wanted a particular type of fountain or style of fountain, his company would build it. And he began working with the defendant. And the defendant owns his own business called I Design. So there were two separate entities of the business.
All right, so there's more of the prosecution's opening statements. Jessica, I want to get into this timeline because it's pretty big. The family went missing February the 4th, 2010. February the 8th, their vehicle was found abandoned close to the Mexican border. Police believe that the family had fled to Mexico for whatever reason. You can see the family there on the screen. It wasn't until 3 years later that the bodies were actually found in a shallow grave. And, of course, the house was not locked down as a crime scene. Prosecution says, hey, it was blunt force trauma that killed a family of 4. But there's no physical evidence there, Jessica. So my question is, how do you prove this case? How do you prove that Charles Merritt was the guy that went in with the sledgehammer, bludgeoned his family with no physical evidence?
Right, and I think that's going to be a hard problem for the prosecutors to overcome. So basically what they're looking at here is, when this family went missing, there were all sorts of ideas as to why they might have gone missing. I think there was a Google search on their computer that said, what kind of documents do children need to go into Mexico? Everybody, even though they couldn't find a reason why, just decided that, they had actually gone in Mexico. And I believe there were some sightings of them that sort of confirmed that. But then when they found their graves, they had to actually come up with a different theory of what had happened. And because of the records that they found that showed, as the prosecutor said, that Merritt had had his hands in the cookie jar and was actually in a deep financial crisis with his gambling problem, right, they attributed the deaths to him, and he became the number one.
Jessica, let me stop you right there. We have to take a quick break. And keep in mind, yesterday, the defense laid out a bombshell saying that someone else actually killed this family of 4. That trial is expected to start soon. We'll be right back here on the Law&Crime Network. Stay tuned. All right, so it looks like there's a sidebar going on in that courtroom. Again, this is the mother, Susan Blake, of Joseph McStay. His family went missing back in 2010. Still with me, Jessica Sloan. Jessica, I want to look at something here very important in the timeline since she is actually on the stand. They went missing on the 4th, that family of 4. Now, on the 10th, she was actually contacted by Charles Merritt, who said he went by the house to check on his friend, his boss, because he hadn't heard from him, and he noticed the dogs were outside. He thought that was strange. So she actually told him to move the food bowls around to see if, when they came back in a couple of days, that if the dogs had been fed, that they would assume that the family was just out of town. Now, with that, again, the house was not locked down as a crime scene here. So with that, we have the defendant going to the house just a few days later. Would there have been a chance for him to actually go inside that home and actually move or discard evidence?
Well, the house wasn't locked down, as you said, and he wasn't the only person who went there. There was somebody else who crawled in a back window and actually went into the house to look for the family as well. So because that house was not locked down as a crime scene, and because there was, this assumption for a long time that the family had voluntarily disappeared, left their car, gone off to Mexico. They were seen in Mexico, and I think in other areas as well. People weren't seeing this as a homicide case. Yep. They were seeing it as a family that voluntarily left.
Right. It appears the mother is back on the stand. Let's get to more of her testimony right now. All right, it appears that Susan Blake is about to read some type of report. Again, we only have audio in that courtroom. She does not want to be on video. Jessica, I want to get back to what we were talking about. You mentioned someone going inside that window. Now, I remember in 2013, Chase Merritt gave an interview with CNN, and he said it was actually him who went in the window because he says he knew that Joseph would leave that window open because of allergies. So to my point, he's admittedly saying that, yes, I knew how to get inside that home without a key, without having to do forced entry. So do you think that will come back to bite him later as this trial goes along?
It certainly gives them access. It certainly, if a family is inside of a home and something happens to them, people are going to wonder how did that happen? And it certainly makes it clear that he does have access to that family. Whether or not that says that he actually committed a murder is a different case, but it shows that he had access and that he had access to the house after the family was gone and could have come in and destroyed any evidence he felt he needed.
Right. I think the mother is back testifying right now. Let's get back into the courtroom. Okay, we heard Susan Blake during the break say she went to the home, Joseph McStay's home, on February 15th. This becomes a crucial day because this is the day that investigators realized the trooper found at the Mexican border belonged to Joseph McStay. Jessica, I want to ask a question here because on that day as well, investigators went to the home, found nothing suspicious, did not seal the home as a crime scene. The mother then went back into the home and did some cleaning. So it becomes crucial here as it relates to physical evidence of this crime. And one of the things she testified to is she didn't see anything amiss. She didn't see any blood. She didn't see the house was in array, if you will, if this violent murder occurred in that home. So as a prosecution, how do you get a jury to say, yes, this guy did it and it happened in this home when the mother was there just a week after they were missing?
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, the lack of physical evidence is the real problem here, especially because, this is supposedly a really terrible, would have been messy kind of murder of not just one person, but 4 people who were beaten with a sledgehammer. So, this is a very hard one to look at and say, well, his mom was there. She didn't see anything amiss. His brother was there. Didn't see anything amiss. His best friend came in the house. Law enforcement looked around, decided not to seal it.
Hey.
They thought everybody had gone on vacation.
Yeah. Hey, Jessica, it looks like they're actually showing autopsy photos in the courtroom. So let's take a look at that live inside that courtroom. Okay, we're still hearing testimony of Susan Blake. Now, keep in mind, again, she did not want to be on screen. That's why we have audio only in that courtroom. Jessica, I want to toss to you. We got about 30 seconds here. We heard how many people went inside that home. Does that also lead to other possible suspects in this case? Because 4 people, 1 person, it makes it hard to believe that 1 person could have pulled this off.
Right, absolutely. 1 person, 4 bodies, a horrific crime, moving them 100 miles away from the house, the lack of physical evidence, many people being able to go into the house and having access to the house apparently through an open back window. This raises a lot of questions, and I have a feeling the defense is going to be expounding those during their opening arguments. Yeah,
and of course, it's Charles Merritt who says he knew that Joseph kept that window open. Of course, Joseph is not here to actually testify to that because he was found, along with his family, in a shallow grave. We're going to take a quick break. We'll have so much more to come in the Charles Merritt case in California. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. Okay, there's still testimony from Susan Blake, the mother of Joseph McStay. Joining me now also, I have Judge Brandon Birmingham in Texas. I hope the weather there for you is much better than it is here in New York. Sir, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great, and I got to tell you, it's absolutely gorgeous today, not to make you feel jealous.
Yeah, sure you're not trying to make me feel jealous. Hey, we just heard testimony from Susan Blake. She said she cleaned up the kitchen after she walked in and smelled this foul odor. Now, me being former law enforcement, you being in the career you're in, we can typically smell the scent of death, if you will. Could it be that maybe there was the scent of death and the mother went in there not knowing that she took out the trash, she cleaned up the kitchen, that she actually disposed of evidence in this case, Judge?
Yeah, that's actually very typical. In a crime scene, whenever you're presenting this, as the prosecutors are doing in this case, crime scene is really broken down into at least 2 parts. There is all of the things that happened to the crime scene before law enforcement got there and all the things that happened after law enforcement got there. So you heard the prosecutor allude to the futon cover that's missing. That's probably important. I think we might hear about that later on.
Right.
In other words, the prosecutors have to go on and explain why the crime scene appeared the way that it did before the police got there, when there's going to be a photographic documentation of the crime scene.
Right, and not only that, when police got there initially back in February of 2010, they didn't, again, lock this down as a crime scene. They came back 3 days later with a warrant. So investigators themselves walked through the crime scene, and there's actually video of investigators walking through the house saying, hey, nothing looks amiss here. But the prosecution, again, is saying that this happened in the house. It was very violent. It was blunt force trauma to all 4 victims. But investigators didn't see that there, Judge. What say you?
Well, I'll tell you, the defense brings up a very good point. If you're going to have a killing the way that they're saying that this killing happened, consistent with blunt force trauma, and you're saying that it happened at the house, well, you better be able to show where that happened, or else show that it was cleaned up in some way. But you have to be able to explain it if you're going to say it.
Right, absolutely. So I think what's crucial here, Judge, and maybe you'll agree, is the timeline here. You know, we're listening to this testimony of Susan Blake, again, the mother of Joseph McStay, and there's a lot of things where she's saying, I don't remember, it was so long ago. They went missing. The entire family went missing February 2010. Their bodies were found 3 years later. I think that will come back. Let's get back into court right now. I believe Susan Blake is back on the stand testifying.
You didn't go upstairs into the house at all?
Oh, yes, I have.
On February 16th, did you go upstairs into the house?
Yes.
And can you describe what you saw when you went upstairs?
A lot of children's outdoor playhouses, but indoor. It was very messy. The closet, their closet to the master bedroom had stuff all over the place. They were living out of suitcases until they were moved in.
How long do you think that you were at the house that day?
I don't know exactly.
Did you go into the office area?
Yes.
What were you looking for in the office area?
Phone numbers, anything I could find.
And can you describe the office area?
It was, well, the kids played in there a lot, so it was messy.
Did you find any information in the office area that you believed to be important?
Yes.
What did you find?
I found some phone numbers that Joey had listed there. I saw some bank account numbers, information like that.
When you went in and you looked for that information, was it in drawers and filed away, or was everything just sort of out there?
In the drawers, kind of out there.
So both?
Both.
Okay. Well, was there like a filing cabinet where everything was filed at all?
No.
And exhibit, showing you what's been marked as exhibit 41. Do you recognize this photo?
Yes, that's the kitchen.
All right, Susan Blake is still testifying to what she saw inside the McStay home when she went there. I want to bring on both Jessica and Judge Birmingham. Jessica, I'll toss to you first. We've listened to Susan Blake. We listened to her talk about how she smelt this foul odor inside the home. She went in, she cleaned it up. I hate to keep touching on this, but I think from a prosecution standpoint, that is a tough hurdle to jump over to prove that something happened inside this home. Once the crime scene, essentially, if the prosecution is saying that's where it happened, was contaminated.
Right. So the evidence has been contaminated if there really was evidence at the house. And I also want to point to the fact that she's saying she smelled a foul odor does not mean that she smelled the odor of people being killed in the house, right? If I leave my house and leave the trash and the garbage disposal dirty, I'm going to come back in a couple of days with diapers especially. I'm going to come back in a couple of days to a foul odor too. So They keep saying that, but it's not actually proof that people were killed in the house.
Right. Judge, let me switch gears here. So
It'll be interesting to see how they play this, though. Is it really going to be a contested fact that the killing happened here? Is the state saying that the killing happened here and that Kavanaugh did it, or the killing happened here and that it was Merritt? I mean, it'll be interesting to see how these lawyers navigate these waters, given the admission by Kavanaugh to the killings.
right, and I'm sure the prosecution will attack that girlfriend when and if she takes the stand. We're going to take a quick break and get right back to the Charles Merritt trial in California. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. Okay, it looks like the courtroom is going to lunch there in the Charles Merritt case. I still have my guests, Jessica Sloan and Judge Brandon Birmingham in Texas, joking about that nice weather they're having there. Judge, I want to toss to you first. This essentially is a cold case. It happened back in 2010. The bodies were found in 2013. Charles Merritt was arrested in 2014. So essentially, this is a hard case. Witnesses forget things. They can't remember things. And of course, whenever you see that, people will say, oh, that's not what you said 4 or 5 years ago. So are you changing your story now? So how do you get around that?
Well, when I was handling cold cases, which was one of my favorite things to do when I was a prosecutor, was the objective proof is in photographs, it's in videos. Those were always very important to have. Also, you as the lawyer need to get ready to be able to rehabilitate or refresh your witnesses' memories with things that they wrote down at the time. They may not be able to remember everything that happened, and certainly after 7 or 8 years, they're not gonna. But they did write things down, whether it's a police officer who made some initial notes, or sometimes witnesses keep journals, or they gave statements to the police. So you do have a bank of information that you can rely on to help refresh some witnesses' memories. And I think that jurors tend to give some people a little bit of leeway in understanding that some of the details that they don't quite remember now, but if they wrote down back then, they'll probably take them to be true.
Right, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there was a Gina Watson who was a friend of Joseph McStay who actually kept notes of everything Charles Merritt said. Let's hear previous testimony from Joseph McStay's mother, Susan Blake. Okay, that was previous testimony from Susan Blake. Now, we've heard this name again. Now, again, the defense says that the girlfriend of Daniel Kavanaugh said he actually testified, or told her rather, that he killed the McStay family. Jessica, I want to toss to you here. I think personally, in about 45 seconds, this will lead to reasonable doubt in that jury's mind. What say you?
Absolutely. You've got somebody else taking responsibility for the crimes that have been committed. You've got no physical evidence. You've got evidence that's contaminated at the house through the cleanup efforts of the mom. They were searching for an answer here, and one has popped up. So if I was the defense, I would definitely be pointing to the fact that somebody else took responsibility for these murders.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We're going to take a quick break to get right back to that Charles Merritt trial here on the Law and Crime Network. Again, the family went missing back in 2010. Their bodies were found in 2013 in 2 shallow graves in the desert in California. The prosecution says Charles Merritt actually did this, and the motive was simply money. We'll be right back here on the Law and Crime Network. So much more to come. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, Judge Birmingham, let me ask this. Of course, the prosecution is saying that this husband, Jeremy Monell, murdered his estranged wife, Tara O'Shea Watson. He stabbed, according to the prosecution, 48 times. We have what we believe to be an eyewitness, the 12-year-old son. Do you think that will be enough to sway this jury in this case?
Well, I would say that it sounds pretty good. I know, and I recall the prosecutor laid out in a very clear and concise manner the evidence that he has. The 12-year-old is going to be such a fascinating witness, because it's unlike other normal eyewitnesses for a number of reasons. Number one, it's a child. Children are not usually developed enough to sort of come up with, elaborate lies. Number two, I don't know what the motive would be for the child to testify that he saw mommy killing daddy, which is the statement. I'm sorry, daddy killing mommy, which is the statement that I recall from opening statement. I think you're also going to see some flight evidence. So the state's got a really strong case in this particular trial.
Right, and to your point, why would this 12-year-old lie about what he saw in that house, especially his dad killing or at least strangling, as the child testified, to his mother? Now, with the child being so young, 12 years old, are there any implications of putting this child on the stand? Is that something the prosecution will do for obvious reasons? He is a juvenile.
Well, yeah. Anytime you have a child that's going to testify, and I've done it from little kiddies all the way up to teenagers, there's always that element of, are they going to freeze up? Are they going to remember? Are they going to come up with and say something that's not in response at all to the question? So there's always a variable there. But, I mean, fundamentally, if you're talking about something like this, children, I think jurors tend to believe children. If you're going to talk about whether a child was getting into trouble for something they did, maybe they're going to try to fib about it. But, I mean, something like this, it's going to be
Right.
have the ring of truth to it.
Right, absolutely. Let's get back into that courtroom right now with Detective Eric Crane.
Rolled and copy of the rolled impression of the right palmar region.
Ask you to flip that over also. Is there something that's on the other side?
Yes, sir.
What is on the other side?
That is the, again, rolled impression of the left palm or palmar region.
Okay. If you could just place that right there. Judge, I asked that S30A and S30B be admitted as evidence.
Any objection?
No. Once you obtained S30B, the known print of Mr. Monell, what was your next step during your analysis?
The analysis phase was done, sir. I moved on to the comparison phase, doing my side-by-side unknown to known comparison of the patent print, the digital image, one-to-one of the patent print, to the known rolled impression of the palmar region.
So I'm going to approach you with a poster board that's been marked as S158 for identification. Do you recognize S158?
Yes, sir.
What is 158?
That is a courtroom display that I created for this case.
Okay. And is this a representation of, for lack of a better term, represent the comparison that you conducted between the unknown print from the knife and the known print of Mr. Monell?
Yes, sir. This represents the patent print, which is the unknown print, here found on the right, and the exact minutia points or major ridge path deviations in the rolled known impression of the right palm.
Judge, I ask this.
Judge.
All right, looks like there's a sidebar going on. We're hearing testimony from Eric Crane. He's a detective in this case. Again, Jeremy Monell is on trial for the murder of his estranged wife, Tara O'Shea Watson. You can see Jeremy Monell there on your screen still with me, Jessica Sloan, and Judge Brandon Birmingham. I know both of you have to go here in just a few minutes. Judge, I want to toss out to you really quick. We were talking earlier about this 12-year-old child, and what I want to know is, how do you put this child on the stand as an attorney? Do you have to be trained in this? Will they get someone else that's actually trained to talk to a child, a juvenile, about this situation? Or will it be the prosecution that's going to ask these questions of the son?
Most likely it'll be the lawyers. And would you have to be trained? Not necessarily formally, but you better have some experience with kids. You better be able to use small words. You better be able to ask very short, concise questions that are easy to understand, no more than 2 syllables. That was always my rule whenever I was putting on a child witness like a 12-year-old in this case.
No more than 2 syllables. That's pretty interesting. I would assume that you would need some kind of training with that. You know, as we talk, normally it's kind of hard to put things that simple. So I think maybe the prosecution will just have to slow down in their testimony. Jessica, what say you in this case regarding the 12-year-old Do you think it's a good idea to put this son on the stand to talk about what he said, or just go off what he told investigators on that day?
You know, I think having him on the stand provides the defense an opportunity to really hash out what it was he saw, to get into some of those issues around whether or not his memory and what he witnessed and reported he had witnessed was actually reliable, to talk about, you know, some of the prior abuse that he might have seen and maybe had confused with what he had seen that night.
Right, and I think the defense will have to be really careful in this. Of course, it's a 12-year-old, so I assume the defense is not going to be pounding on the desk and yelling at this 12-year-old son who lost his mother. I want to thank both of you for joining me today. I know you both have to go. Jessica, I know you're out in California. You probably got great weather. I know the judge said he had great weather, and we're up here freezing in New York City. But I want to thank both of you for your time. We're going to take a quick break and have so much more to come here on the Law and Crime Network. Stay tuned.